Nigeria saw a 12% increase in gas flaring in 2024, the second highest global rise, despite just a 3% uptick in oil production, according to the World Bank's Global Gas Flaring Tracker report. Flaring by NNPCL and smaller operators accounted for 60% of total flares and 75% of the increase. The report listed Nigeria alongside Iran, the US, Iraq, and Russia as top contributors to global flaring, which rose from 148 to 151 billion cubic meters. Despite Nigeria's pledge to end routine flaring by 2030, flaring intensity continues to grow, raising questions about enforcement and transition readiness. We have joining us Femi Oladehin, Managing Director, Argentil Capital Partners. It's great to have you in.
Always a pleasure.
Right. I mean, the report, it does seem or appear grim. What are the economic and environmental implications of Nigeria being the second largest flaring nation in 2024?
I mean, look, environmentally, we've always struggled, right, in being able to get the right mix in terms of production and the damage to the environment. It's something that we've always struggled with as a country. From 30, 35 years ago, Nigeria started to look at gas flaring as an issue and started to create policies to reduce the impact of gas flaring on the environment. However, you would also understand that if you look at the countries that are the biggest contributors, one of the most important underlying factors has been a lack of investment in gas infrastructure. And as long as we continue to have that lack of investment, then it means that for producers to continue to produce, they have options than to flare. Because remember that, I mean, for education, the way oil and gas works is that in most fields, when you have done your drilling activities and you are in production, what comes out of the ground is a combination of liquids and gas. To be able to get out the liquids, you need to get the gas out as well. And so what happens is that in most countries, they are able to trap that gas at the wellhead and effectively convert it into usable gas. But what has happened is that because we haven't had significant investment on the Nigerian side, we're continuing to see a situation whereby producers just have to flare because it's more expensive for them to process.
Right, and so the issue here and the reason this hasn't come to an end or isn't reducing is because we lack the infrastructure, right, to mitigate against this gas flaring. We're looking at Nigeria's target of ending this routine gas flaring by 2030. Is it still realistic given the recent spike?
I mean, the government policies speak to the fact that that's a target. Recently, last year, the NNPCL actually increased the penalty for gas flaring from, I think, about $1.50 per million scoff to over $3. And that is supposed to discourage, producers from flaring. But the bigger problem is that to get a gas processing plant and the transport infrastructure for gas, you need significant investments. We're currently working on a number of such initiatives. And you're talking about transaction sizes of upwards of $100 million for just a 50 million scoff per day type investment. Now, that does not include the pipeline infrastructure that you need to be able to transport your liquids, because as you know, gas is gas, right? I mean, in transporting it, you either liquefy it or you transport it in its natural state. And each of these require significant investment. So the bigger issue we have is an investment issue. Until we're able to gather the investment and create the right environment to encourage the market or entrepreneurs to invest, we'll continue to have gas flaring problems. So to answer your question directly, this 2030 deadline is very, very ambitious and it's almost setting Nigeria up to fail to accomplish because the key ingredients required for you to be able to implement this policy just don't exist.
I mean, we'll get into it on a deeper level, but you have highlighted that the fact that the penalties have increased, but we are still seeing this spike in gas flaring. How far are they going as regards implementing these penalties and these measures? Yes, you have the guidelines, yes, you have the penalties, but are we measuring some substantial level of implementation?
So look, the truth is that yes, there is implementation. The regulators don't play when they tell you that there is a penalty. There are a number of producers that have shut in production simply because the penalty for gas exceeds the revenues that they're making from their crude oil sales. So the right thing for them to do is shorten their production until they're able to put in the investment required to trap the gas and process it. Now, remember that a couple of years ago, the NUPRC had also tried to encourage third-party investors in the gas space. Now, the problem with that is that those third-party investors require significant comfort that production investment will continue on those fields. Think about it this way. Somebody is producing oil. I sign a contract with them to go in there and trap the gas instead of them burning it. But my investment is predicated on them being able to continue investing in production and ensuring that there's continued product on their fields. So I have variables that are outside of my control. So for investors to take a conversation on something like that and expect that there would be answers is going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the questions will still come nevertheless. But you have mentioned that investment is needed to solve this problem. The sector has, attracted a significant amount of investment. We have $16 billion over the past 2 years, but we know that there's a lot more that's needed. What do you make of the pace, at which, this sector is attracting that investment? And what more do you think needs to be done? There are a lot of reforms we're seeing. What more do you think needs to be done to position the sector for the needed investment?
That we had and that brought us to this situation was the failure of the several governments to pass the Petroleum Industry Act. The failure to pass the PIA created the problem we're all suffering today, because what happened is that for a 20-year period, whilst Nigeria was dragging its foot and politicians were playing politics with the PIA, investment into the oil and gas sector ceased. The implication of that is that the investment that needed to go into developing new fields, developing better production, developing new technologies simply disappeared. What happened is that even though we're making and they're saying significant big announcements, we're literally playing catch up. For this industry to get to the point where it's continuously adding reserves and producing, we're saying we need about $100 billion every year over a 10-year period. That's $1 trillion of continuous investment in the oil and gas space. Now think about it, Nigeria's GDP is currently $230 or $240 billion. Where would that investment come if we need a third of our GDP of investment? So the truth is that the government needs to aggressively market these opportunities to the people who have the capacity to invest in it, and also provide comfort for them that their investment is secured. Look, let's be honest with ourselves. One of the biggest challenges this industry has had over the last 10 years is vandalization and criminality. So today, gas pipelines are being vandalized on a regular basis. And it's actually quite preposterous because gas is not something that they can trap, right, and export. But out of just vandalism, and criminality, we're seeing significant damages to investments. So what is happening is that for the people who have the big tickets, who have the big checks, they're wary of producing on Nigeria's shallow waters or onshore Nigeria. So most of that investment is going into the deep offshore fields, wherein the cost of trapping gas and all of that is significantly higher. So look, the reality here is that the government has to be very deliberate in the kind of interventions that we see. The level of criminality in the Niger Delta that continues to lose Nigeria almost 20-30% of its production is something that we need to fix. Until we do that, that investment is not going to show up.
Mm-hmm. So better marketing and security around the infrastructure. Let's still stick with the money, right? With all that's going on, there are questions now being raised. The reason the gas flaring how that will impact Nigeria's potential to perhaps even attract climate-conscious investors and development partners. Any solution to this?
Look, the solution is to invest. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it isn't, right? The reality here is that to solve this problem, we need significant investment. And then we also need deliberate policy to encourage producers to produce, and this is where the bigger issue is. We have a government who's very focused on increasing revenues to the government, and that comes to the detriment of somebody, and usually that's the corporate. And as long as the corporate don't feel like there are significant tax holidays, there are significant investment protection treaties, there are significant protections for their infrastructure when they bring that in, it will be very difficult for us to attract the investment that's required. And to make it even worse, Europe and America, until recently, classified even gas as dirty fuel, which meant that some of the investors who would have looked at potential solutions here were discouraged from investing. It is important that we continue to champion that gas is a transition fuel for the continent, and we cannot accept the painting of gas in black dust by the West. These people used gas to develop their countries over the last 100 years, and suddenly they suddenly realized that gas, coal, and alternatives are dirty. The reality is that for Africa as a continent, and for Nigeria in particular as a country, who's way behind on its technology and its energy journey, we can't accept the blacklisting of gas as a black fuel. And we must continue to be at the forefront of pushing that gas be seen as a clean fuel so that we can attract the climate type of investments that is currently available in the world.
Gas is the transition fuel, but how do you also think, and sticking with the whole climate financing conversation, how do you think Nigeria can leverage the carbon markets and climate finance tools to even reduce routine flaring? And are there lessons that Nigeria can learn from other countries who have successfully done so?
Oh, yes, there are always lessons. Look, in the last 5 years, there's been over $150 to $200 billion of green financing, or climate type financing that has been available in the world. And that continues to grow on a very rapid basis. The reality here is that for Nigeria to benefit, it has to be clearly from a policy perspective. Our policy must speak to removing the bottlenecks that can prevent this, creating the market and developing this regulatory infrastructure around the trading of carbon credits and ensuring that Nigeria becomes a hub. Look, this is the key issue here. We have to be very selfish about how we see policy. You can see with the way the government of the United States have taken an America First policy across the board, even to the detriment of global trade. Nigeria has to take that sort of policy if it wants to see the benefits that are required. So one big element here is, why can't Nigeria become a hub for carbon trading? Why can't we create the regulatory infrastructure that encourages other people to come and trade their carbon credits on the Nigerian market, given our very developed capital markets? And once we have that, then we can attract the right financing to ensure that we're able to develop those projects in the first place. And I think once we have that deliberate policy, and we have regulators that are experienced and intelligent enough to be able to see the market and tap its potential. And I think that there is a world out there wherein we become leaders on the African continent, for example, for carbon trading and carbon credits markets. And that can only be positive for our market industry and for our industry in the long term.
So we're back to infrastructure and secure infrastructure and better marketing. Finally, we have Nigeria's upstream decarbonization framework. Can it effectively reduce methane emission by 60% by 2031, as is the set target?
Look, I mean, like I said at the beginning of the show, right? Targets are always good. What I would always say is that, are you able to develop the infrastructure and the framework that is required for you to meet your targets? And then secondly, are you able to provide the right incentives to investors? We do this thing where we use pain as an incentive or penalties as an incentive. I think it's a very wrong way of attracting investment. Investment should be a carrot situation, not a stick situation. If you continue to put cash in the pocket of investors by giving them the right policy frameworks, the right environment, the tendency is that they will put their money where their mouth is. But when you use policy that is based on pain as a way of attracting investment, it's only short term. People are going to have a knee-jerk reaction, but they are not able to make long-term investment decisions. So what I would say to you is that 2031 looks like a very aggressive timeline. We're literally saying 6 years to reduce methane emission by 60%. But I think that if we focus on driving growth through a positive policy rather than a negative penalty-based policy, then there is the ability for us to galvanize the capital. I mean, I'm an investment banker. That's what we do. As long as we can galvanize the capital that's required, then we will be able to achieve these things.
All right, so hopefully we are able to achieve these things, and we'll be tracking that, and hopefully we have you to provide us more insight as things progress. Thank you for your time, Femi Oladehin, Managing Director, Argentil Capital Partners.